What's up guys, Shawnthebro here, and today we're going to be going over part 1 of the character select screen from the Super Smash Brothers tutorial. So, it's split up into 2 parts because one is going to be for the actual implementation of spawning the character that you choose and the initial widget setup, and part 2 is going to be actually making the Super Smash Brothers effect where you have a hand that carries a coin over to the player you want, things like that. So today, we're going to be going over the logic that we want to implement and actually be able to make the choice that the player selects. So if I click on this guy, then actually be able to show it correspond in the actual level. Okay? So to start off, right off the bat, let's make an additional character. Now, you can go ahead and make your own character in the right way. Just, go make a new one, add a BP, blueprint, code class, all that good stuff. But what we're actually going to want to do here is, for me, I just went ahead and went into my blueprint and right-clicked on my character BP and duplicated it. Like this. It puts out another object, which is going to be named the same thing with an _1. It'll have all the code and all the blueprints you already have in here. So basically, this will work for players 2, 3, and 4. That's what happened here. And this is something kind of new. We initially had this. I'll go over this later. But the important part is if you go to the mesh in the viewport, I've now changed my character's mesh to this wonky looking thing. So the original, if we see him, looks like this. He's this naked guy. But this one is this colorful clown looking guy. So the way you can change it really easily and show that you're actually using the separate characters, if you go to the mesh like I've said, go to the viewport, scroll down here, you can either change the skeletal mesh if you make a copy of that, or you can just change the material. So I can make it whatever I want. And it's got to compile the shader, so sometimes it'll look a little like this, where it's just kind of grayed out, but then he'll become like this dude. He becomes Dirt Man. Okay, so essentially that's part 1, and that's simple enough, right? And here you go, by the way. Here is the skeletal mesh, in case you wanted to see it. Again, I literally just copied it, changed a material on it, but feel free, instead of making this other mesh, to just change it on here. And just to prove to you that it works. There you go. Now we are Dirt Man. We are Groot, or something like that. Okay, so that's how we get that done. Close that out. Okay, so what we're going to start with after we have our characters in place is the actual functionality we want to implement. So today we want to make it so if we select a certain character in the character select screen, he gets transferred to the actual level. So in the game mode, we originally had something where we were tracking the different players that we have. We had a players array, right? And in there, we had this E character class, Enum, which had just mannequin for now. And what it was is this was actually your character class. So this could be Mario, Solid Snake, Mewtwo, whatever. Well, I moved it out of the game mode and put in something called the base game instance. So you see I've done nothing in the C++ part of the project for this, but I have put stuff in the header file. I'll explain why in a second. Let's actually make this new class. So just go to Add New C++ class, Show All Classes, Game Instance, and then call it whatever you want. I called mine Base Game Instance. Okay, and then before you go any farther, go to Edit, Project Settings, and we have to set our game instance. The game instance is essentially an object that will hold data that persists through levels, through scenes, even through loads, depending on how you set it up. So go to Maps and Modes, and then your default game mode and everything should be set up properly. Feel free to change your editor startup map to the main menu or whatever, which we'll be making later in this episode, but here's where you do it if you want to. This means when you load the editor, this map will open by default. And here where it says game instance class, choose your new base game instance that you just made, or whatever you called it. Okay. In the base game instance, we actually want to use our e-character class Enum in here. So if you've been following this tutorial, if you haven't, I will post an iCard in the top right corner that has the previous episode where we set this stuff up. But if you have, you'll recognize this Enum. It's okay if you don't recognize it. We're going to use it here, so just copy this anyway. But essentially, get your Enum class for your E-character class. So basically, these are the names of the Enum itself, the Enum variable. So VE default, VE default 2. I called them very similar names because essentially it's just a reskin of the mannequin. It's not an actual different character. Well, it is a different character. Okay, I could see how that could get confusing. It is a different character in Unreal, but in terms of the game we are making, this is just a reskin of this character. So hopefully that makes sense. This display name is what it just shows as for us when we're using it in Editor, so we know what characters we're selecting. So give it the name of the character. Mannequin, Mannequin 2. You can put spaces in and everything. And we also had a E-character class, variable in the game mode. And you'll see I've removed both the Enum and that variable. Now the reason I took it out of the game mode, and you could actually leave it in the game mode, but the reason I took it out is because the game instance has persistent data, like I mentioned. So what will actually happen is when we select our character, we can set this Enum right here, and then the variable will stay to the next level. So when we go from the main menu to the level that we just chose to load, we now will have the data already from the character, from the selections we made on the character select screen in the next level. This will make it very easy to spawn the proper characters that we want to spawn based on what we selected. You could do this and leave it in the game mode and pass the data along to the game mode when the level changes. So feel free to do that if that's more comfortable for you or easier for you to understand. I recommend doing it this way to start off because passing the data along can get kind of annoying very quickly, especially if you have to pass a lot. And the other issue is, especially during things like when you're doing the after screen, if you want to do a rematch, you have to continue to pass that data along, whereas this will keep it, so not really a big deal there. Lastly, make this a T array instead of just a E-character class variable, because we're going to keep one for all of our different players. So if you have 8 players, we'll have 8 of these. Right now we're only doing 4, so you can have 4, but again, this game supports up to however many you want to add, so feel free to just add as many as you want. Okay, so that's actually it in terms of the code. Just make sure to remove the Enum from the game mode and the character class, the Enum instance from the game mode. So put them in your base game instance. Or if you choose not to do that, that's fine. Just be aware that you'll have to pass this data along when we switch levels. Okay? So what we're going to do now is make a main menu and make functionality actually happen. So if you go to, I called mine levels, so just made a new folder, add new level. It'll just have you rename it, call it main menu. You can keep it empty for now and just make a widget to go along with it, which is what we're going to do. So I put it in blueprint, widgets, character select screen, so just add new. As always, the way I record my screen, I can't show you how to make a widget, but if you have this window open on add new, go all the way down to the bottom. So 3 below paper 2D, it says user interface. And then right below slate brush, there's slate widget style. Right below that is widget blueprint. Select that. You'll make a new widget. That's what this is. I added 2 buttons and 2 images. So the buttons are what we're going to be actually pressing, but the images are what's going to show up on the screen. So just to showcase this a bit, the second one is a flat out image. So you can't see any highlighting or anything when I hover over it. But the second one has the first one here has the background cut out. So you can see the button highlighting in the background. That's essentially how this is going to work. So drag on 2 buttons onto your screen. Drag on 2 images. Make them whatever size. Organize it however you want. You could bring on 30 guys now if you know your roster you want to use. And then on the button, scroll all the way down. And make sure you make an on-pressed for all your buttons. On-pressed. And then for this button, on-pressed. So scroll all the way down to events in the details panel and click on-pressed. Essentially, on-pressed is whenever this button is interacted with. So if you're using a controller and you've highlighted this key, or you've highlighted this button, you press A or the confirm button, then it'll select it. If you press enter and you're hovering over it with a keyboard, you'll select it. If you click on it with the mouse, you'll select it. This is what we want. It's important to note, if you put the images the exact same size as the buttons, like I have, so you can see there's actually a button back there. I'm going to undo this, but if you put these the same size, you won't be able to click your button through it. So click on your images right here. Scroll down to behavior, visibility, non-hit testable, self-only, or self and all children, depending on what you're doing. Non-hit testable means you can click on this image and it will click behind it. It will click everything behind it. So we're actually clicking the button when I open this window and click this. Even though I clicked on the image, I was actually clicking the button because the image does not receive any input. So if you were to turn this off, just to show you, visible, whatever. If I go to click on this button, the image is blocking it. You can see I can't even highlight the button behind it. There was a spot where I got it because the image was just, yeah, right there. So I'd have to click on like the very edge. But if I actually click anywhere on the image, I can't do it. So you want this to be non-hit testable. Okay. Now, there's a few things we need to do in here. So first of all, I get a base game instance reference. This is just so we don't have to cast every time we go to use it, which is very important, especially as we do the second part in this series where we're going to be dragging coins. You don't want to cast every time. So in the construct of your widget, get your game instance, cast it to your game instance that you made, your C++ class, and then you can either right-click and promote to variable, and it will make a variable for you, new variable 0, and then you can just rename it. I'm going to delete it. Or you can add a new variable like this, look in your list for it, and search for your character or your game instance class. Mine is base game instance. Go to object reference, and there you go. So I already have it here. For me, it is game instance reference. So set that right away. Then, on pressed, these are the things we set up with the buttons. On pressed, if the game instance reference is valid, so the way you get this node is you drag this into the scene, get game instance, right click on it if I could, and do convert to validated get. What this will do is you can use the reference by dragging off this node, but you can also check if it's valid or not. And this is going to be helpful. So we only if the game instance reference is valid. If it's not, it will crash. That's why we want to check. Then we want to do this logic. Now, admittedly, the logic here is a bit rough. This is temporary logic right here. We're going to be making this better in part 2. And actually, this is where we're going to be implementing the coin and everything. For now, to get it to work, I needed, and to show it with 4 players, I needed to put some stuff in here so that it could be seen. So I'll explain it, but don't worry too much about this. This is going to be removed and fixed in the next episode. But here's what's going on. So remember we made the character classes array. It's the Enum instance array in the base game instance right here. The T array of eCharacter class, which is our Enum. So we made this because we want to keep track of everybody's character class, everybody's character that they select in the main menu. Because right now, sure, this is single player. So I select this. Well, I'm single player. Great. But if you have 4 players, well, one variable is not going to cut it. So we have an array of them. And for now, just add as many characters as you're currently spawning into the scene. So literally drag off your array and hit add. And then it will give you the variable, the type you want to choose. So I made it if you select the first button. This is the first one. So this is the one on the left. The second one is the one on the right here. If you press the one on the left, then it spawns all mannequins. If you press the one on the right, it spawns all mannequin 2s, which is the funky looking one. Then all we're doing is opening our level. It's literally open level. And then you just give it the level name. So if you're using the tutorial or the template, the side scroller template, then it's going to be side scroller example map. If you made your own map, just put in the name, but just to show you, side scroller right here. This is the map that I'm trying to load. So you see, you just take the name from it and put it in there. Okay, and that's it for the character select screen. So essentially what we're doing is checking which button we press and then determining our character classes based on that. Again, there'll be 4 players next time, or 4 coins or whatever. So next time we will not set all of these to be the same class just because one person clicked a button. But for now, it's sufficient. What's up, guys? Shawnthebro from the future here. Don't worry, your video didn't restart. But I forgot to add something in here, and this is a common mistake for me. I always forget about the level blueprint. So let's go ahead and fix that up and put it in this video. So just for the record, if you want to spawn your character select screen as soon as your main menu loads up, go to blueprints, open level blueprint. On begin play, just go ahead and do create widget right here. Select your character select screen and then add it to the viewport. And it's that simple, but don't forget, because I did. A quick note that I wanted to add about the character HUD before we go any farther. So, just so you know, by changing, if you've been watching this tutorial prior, by changing the character classes from the game mode to the game instance, you will now have to change these over, unfortunately. I apologize for that. Probably should have planned a little bit better, but you live and you learn. And we're certainly learning. Okay, so in the construct for the character HUD widget, instead of getting the game mode, I now get the game instance, cast it to the base game instance, and set my variable. Here's my variable. You set it the same way, or you create it the same way we created it in the character select widget. So just make sure it's the base game instance in here, or right click and hit promote to variable here. We still get the game mode because the game mode still holds the players. Now, some people would argue this was bad, or a lot of people would probably say it's bad, and I don't necessarily blame them, but there is a reason I'm doing it for now. So just keep it this way. We can change it later, especially when we go to change it to online multiplayer and things like that. A lot of things will have to change with this. But again, we're just laying the groundwork. We can always make it cleaner and make it better. So cast to get your game instance reference. We don't need a reference to the game mode because we're not going to cast to it other than this construct. So we're going to cast to it one time. Okay, so if you get the game mode, cast it to your game mode. Mine's SSB template game mode. Then grab your players array. Again, sorry to keep switching back, but players is the T array of the actual players that we're storing in the game. And then do this stuff, set your references. Now, this was already done in a previous episode, so I won't go over it too much. But essentially, we're going through our players, checking if the player number is valid, like 1 through 4 or 1 through 8 or however many we have. If it is, set your player references. This is specifically for the game in-game stuff, not for anything afterward, not determining who's actually player 1 in the game or anything like that, but just setting the references so that the game, that specific match knows which players are which. So there you go. So feel free to watch the other episodes to catch up. But I did want to show you that we made the game instance change here. And also, in all of these, unfortunately, if it required the game mode, we're now going to use the game instance. So get the reference. So just drag it on like this. We're going to use our character classes. We're going to get 0. So we're going to get the index of the character. So remember, code 0 is always the first, well, most of the time 0 is the first index. So for player 1, we're going to use 0. For player, hold on, let me get to the same one. They were split up a bit. For player 2, this is the character names. Use index 1. Player 3 character name, use index 2. And player 4 character name, use index 3. So basically, this character class is going to store in its array, in order, the character classes of the players. So player 1 is 0, player 2 is index 1, player 3 is index 2, player 4 is index 3. You're going to want to do that for your image as well. So that was the character name. You don't need to do anything different for the damage counter because we don't need the character to know. We just need to know we just need to have the player reference to see how much damage they have on them. But for the images, like for their little icons, so I'll show you these things right down here, these mannequins at the bottom, we do need to get the game instance reference, get their character class, and do the same thing. This guy's player 2, so he's index 1. This guy's player 3, so he's index 2. This guy's player 4, so he's index 3. And this guy's player 1, so he's index 0. Okay. the last additional change I wanted to make in here is, it's a simple one, but it will make your life a bit easier in the end. So when you're in here, in the get image, when you're getting the images for the characters, you can make variables that are slate brushes is what they're called. So it's a slate brush structure, and it stores an image, as you can see here. So if you have images, and I'll show you, I do, character icons, I have images of, I have these 3 images. So if you have images, and if you import an image, it just becomes a texture. So if you have like a PNG or a JPEG in there, it becomes a texture. So this is mannequin.png. So if you have a texture in here, when you go to, sorry, I got lost for a second. When you go to make a slate brush, you make a new variable. You probably know this by now, but I just want to make sure everyone's got it. Type in slate brush, this guy right here. I'm going to delete him, but I called him mannequin character icon brush, mannequin 2 character icon brush, and you can see I've set the textures as those images. So now when we're returning the image brush from the binding, you can just return this variable, and you can see that the image is correct. So there you go. Simple enough on that stuff. Just make sure you do that for all your players. Sorry about the change, guys. I know that takes a lot of effort to actually change, but yeah, I figured this was the better way to do it, so might as well get that done. All right. I'm going to close out the character HUD. By the way, if you want these images to actually show up as the characters like you see here, on your image, if you go to your brush, this will be bind. You can click down on it, and it will actually know the icons, the properties of the icons that you want to use, or that you could use. So you don't, as long as you have them in here as slate brushes. And to do that, again, literally add new slate brush, set your image, then when you go here and bind it, you just select your slate brush that you want. So game character 1 icon, character 2 icon. And then when it loads in game, bam, there you go. What we're going to do now is make something called a base character interface. That's what I called it, but it's basically, it's just a blueprint interface. So if you're not familiar with interfaces, interfaces are functions that can be called across different classes as long as they inherit the interface. So you use it for if you want to call one function that can be applied across whatever class. You don't have to explicitly cast that class and then call that function, nothing like that. So add new, go to blueprints, and go to blueprint interface right here. When you make this, this will be empty. You won't even see that node. It would look like this. You can press plus to add a new function. See? I'm going to delete this one because I already made it. I called mine set character references. Now you don't fill out any logic in here. This is just to make functions that can be used across multiple classes. So what we want to do is use set character references in our character BPs. This set character references function is going to fix a bug we had in earlier episodes where characters would register multiple times as like player 1, 2, 3, or 4. We're going to fix that up since we have to dynamically spawn them based on their class now. This is important. So make an interface, a blueprint interface, and then go ahead and make a new function. What we want to do from here, now that we have our new function, we can close out of this if you want or keep it open. It doesn't really matter. In all your character BPs, I have the second one open still, but you should also do this in your first one. This is the same stuff we were doing in the HUD. So we have 4 references in our character, and we were setting our player references. Well, this was causing a bug because technically it was going over multiple references, or it was going over references multiple times. What we want to do, instead of setting our references on construct, we want to actually use our new function, event set character references. So to access a blueprint interface functions, okay, to access blueprint interface functions, you need to go to class settings and go to interfaces, implemented interfaces. This will be empty. Just hit add, select the one you made in your list. I've already selected it. Base character interface, but it will be right here in this list. Now, just type in the function you want to see. set character references. Calling the function means you're going to execute this function. What we want to do is when this function is called, we want to set these player references. So go ahead and use the event set character references right here. Okay. Do that for player 1 and 2 instead of construct. So our crazy looking guy and our naked guy are both going to have that now. Make sure, again, make sure you add it to each of them so that they use that interface. And you don't have to change anything else with them. Alright guys, lastly, we just have to change some things with our spawning in the game mode to make sure we're spawning our actual characters and not the default pawn stuff. On begin play of the game mode, we're going to get our game instance reference and set it. You're going to want to get all actors of class player start. I just grabbed the first one. Again, this is about random spawning stuff. If you want to see that episode, I can link in an icon in the top right. But essentially, this is doing the same logic it already has done. I haven't changed anything with this. What I did add is before we were spawning, we were just setting our actor's transform of the first character because we had a default pawn class set. Now, the reason I intentionally set this last episode is so we didn't have to ever have a game mode without a character, because that doesn't really make sense. And while that is true, and while we could continue to do this, I realized I was kind of just adding complexity that didn't really need to exist. So I would just go ahead and remove the default pawn class, and we'll use this simpler trick instead. It's essentially the same thing as setting a default pawn class because it automatically possesses the character that is given as the default pawn and spawns it. Or spawns and possesses it, I should say. But we're going to do this manually so that we can control which character actually spawns without having to change the default pawn class. So, get your game instance reference, get your character classes, get the first index since this is player 1. Then what we're going to do is we're going to do a switch on it. So literally drag off and do switch. It'll do switch on the Enum. If it's a mannequin, for example, the character on the left, then we're going to spawn actor, literally spawn actor from class. And then in the drop down, select your mannequin. So for me, it is SSB template character BP. You can see the path there. Give the transform of the first player spawn. We're going to get player controller 0, unpossess it. Unpossess the thing that it's auto-possessing. So literally, just drag off get player controller 0, unpossess. That will eliminate whatever you were trying to control or whatever was trying to spawn and just say, nope, I don't have anything right now. Then we're going to possess the new player with player controller 0. We're going to do the same things that we did last episode. Add this new player that we made, this new actor we spawned, to our player list. Set it to the player number based on the index in the array. Set the actor transform to the transform of the player spawn. We don't have to do this anymore since we're spawning the actor on the spot. So I'm going to get rid of it. So now that we got rid of the transform, or the set actor transform, because we didn't actually need it anymore, and I realized that while I was recording, now all we're going to do is once we've set our player number, and remember, if you've chosen mannequin 2 or the character on the right, then we just spawn an SSB template character 2 BP instead, as you can see right here. It's the exact same logic otherwise. Then we do the same logic we were doing for spawn players before. So you take the num players that we set, which is going to be 3, which remember code starts at 0. So this is 4 characters essentially. Since we've already spawned the first one, we can get rid of one of them. So num players -1 is the last index. We loop through it and we call spawn player for each of these. Okay, so this is all the same stuff in spawn player that we have been doing in the previous episodes. However, I'll go over it very, very shortly since this is already a long episode. Basically, we get our player starts, loop through them, make sure they're not already set to taken. Then, if they're not set to taken, we spawn a player controller. And normally we would spawn our actor and possess it. We're still going to do that, but what we're going to do this time is get our game instance reference, get our character class. Here we're going to actually use not 0, but the array, or excuse me, the index of the spawn player array. Now the reason we're not using it here is because this kind of relies on me setting up the character select screen appropriately, if you will. So right now, it doesn't matter what you put in here. We will fix this in part 2 and make it right, but we just haven't made the stuff for it yet. So you can make it something and play around with it and see how it works. It will work, but we just, again, don't have anything set up for it. So you can leave it at 0 for now if you'd like. Then do a switch on it like we did before. Choose the actor we want to spawn. You set their spawn transform with the transform of the player start. That's what this orange line is. Then we possess them with the new player controller we made. Okay? Then we set our player start to taken, add our player, set our player number. So this is basically all the same stuff we already did in the game mode, except now we've added a switch statement that is going to change based on the character classes array that we made. Alright. Then lastly, once we are done with spawning our players, that's when we want to call set character references. Instead of on construction of the character, we want to call after every character has spawned. That way we're aware of who's who. So just get your players array. This is your game mode, so your players array, as long as you made it edit anywhere in Blueprint read write, you'll be able to grab it, loop through it, and call set character references. And then set character references is this function we made in the interface. So when you call this, then this logic runs right here that we just set up. So cast your game mode, sets the player references for every character. That way every character knows who's player 1, 2, 3, and 4. And there you go, guys. If you've done all that, and I know it was a lot of changes, but if you have done all that, then when you go to play your game, you should be able to select a button or select a character. I'll pick this guy. And he should look like your second character or be your second character if you did more than just the mesh change and actually made another character. Just make sure to spawn that actor instead. And then you'll still have all your functionality of all 4 players. If you've been following the other episodes, they can all attack and do everything as normal. Alright guys, so there you go. That's how you can do that's part 1 of how to make a character select screen in Super Smash Brothers tutorial. So in part 2, we will be going over how to implement the actual coin and multiple players selecting things on the character select screen. Once we do that, we will also make it so this part of the blueprint where we are spawning the players is not going off of 0, but is actually going off of the proper index that we are using. Alright guys, so I think that's all I've got for today's episode. If you enjoyed, please subscribe. It helps more than anything else you can do for the channel, and it lets me know what you're interested in and if I did a good job. Please feel free to ask any questions. I know this was a long video with actually a lot of changes to other code we already implemented, so I apologize for that. But I think it's better to do a little bit of backtracking and make it right than leave it wrong and let it go for a long time. So if you guys are interested in joining the Discord, there's a link in the description. I can't put it in an iCard because YouTube is weird. But if you join the Discord, then I'll be able to help you with more specific issues you have. Such as, you know, like, oh, why can't my characters be controlled after I made this change? Or why doesn't my second character show up? Things like that. You can also recommend any ideas in there. And it's just a fun-loving community if you're interested in joining. We have over 100 members, so there's plenty of people to help out, too. Lastly, if you're interested in supporting us on Twitch or coming and hanging out with me in so-called real life as opposed to just over YouTube videos, Shawnthebro 27 on Twitch. Yeah, you can go check us out. We do Souls Wednesday, which is like Dark Souls games, so Demon Souls, Bloodborne, and of course Dark Souls. And we do Resident Evil Friday, so a bunch of Resident Evil games on Friday. Pretty simple, you know, we're not very complex over there. We do all the hard thinking here on the programming channel. So anyway, guys, thank you so much for the love and support, and I will see you in the next episode, guys. Goodbye.